In this episode of True Crime Black, we look at the murder of a black woman in New Orleans Park. The crime scene was so brutal that it has been referred to as a sadistic killing by the investigators. Then, we look at the case of a young child who was left at a New Jersey church. Miles away, his mother was murdered. How did he end up in a different state? Hopefully, we can find answers to both of these cases. With that said, let's get started. Back in 2016, a woman's family was met with a tragic event. Earlier that day, things started out as if they were normal. It was just like any other day. The 36-year-old woman texted her mother that morning like she usually would. Her coworkers were shocked to learn that she was not at work that day. That was unlike her. Still though, they thought nothing of it. Sadly, they were wrong to think that it was nothing. Back at the woman's apartment in New Orleans Park, the police were descending on the area. But what was going on? Why were the police there? It turns out that they were responding to a 911 call. The woman, Markia Benson, was no longer alive. This is her story. It was a very, very senseless, sadistic murder. Whoever committed this murder is someone that we believe she knew, said Upper Darby Police Superintendent Michael Chitwood. Markia Benson's body was naked in her bathtub. She had several burns throughout her body due to the scalding hot water that was running onto her skin. As the police made their way through her apartment, they found that her home was in a state of disarray. The furniture in her apartment had been knocked over and there were papers thrown all over the floor. There was also a hateful message, directed at women, written on the wall in red lipstick. The exact message has never been revealed by the investigators. They believe that Markia knew her killer and that it was personal. They explain that the lack of forced entry, or signs that point to it, shows that Markia had to willingly allow that person into her apartment. Markia had been killed by being struck with a blunt object to her head and neck. She was murdered at around 9:30 a.m. The police believe she was murdered in the early morning hours because of the amount of steam and the temperature inside of the apartment. There is also a chance that whoever the killer was entered her apartment while she was getting ready for work. The police believe that Markia let the person inside, and then the attack happened. They continued to speculate. She was most likely awake and out of bed, but then forced back onto the bed where she was assaulted. But either way, the investigators don't believe that she saw it coming. They believe that it was a surprise attack because, if she were to engage in a fight with someone, then the neighbors most likely would have heard the struggle. Then, the forensics team did a walkthrough of the apartment, which was now the crime scene. Inside of her bedroom, they immediately found physical evidence. There was blood on her pillow, on the mattress, and on the wall. To start, the forensic team did a blood spatter analysis. That helped them to determine that the attack took place either on the bed or around that area. There was not a major sign of struggle. None of the items in the bedroom were damaged, destroyed, or out of sorts in a way that would suggest that a struggle took place. Her fingernails, at the time, were not that long, so there wasn't a guarantee that the person would have been scratched during a struggle. What's next is more speculation. The investigators believe that she was likely knocked unconscious at some point. And then, while unconscious, she was dragged out of her bedroom and into the bathroom. Her bathroom is located right next to the bedroom and would not have been a long distance for someone to drag her. Markia was then placed in the bathtub, and the killer would then turn on the water. The hot water, specifically. There was scalding hot water turned on her while she was in the tub and left running until she was discovered later that day. Earlier that day, Markia's ex-boyfriend went with a coworker of hers to perform a welfare check on her. They were concerned for her well-being after she failed to make it to work that morning, something that was knowingly out of her character. The apartment complex's manager let them into the building after they explained why they were there. After getting in, they called the police when they discovered the crime scene. "I've been doing this a long time. If I say to you, I've seen 500 dead bodies in my life. You can look at a scene and you can tell the violence associated with the scene. This was a very, very violent scene, said Police Superintendent Michael Chitwood. The police zeroed in on Markia's ex-boyfriend as their prime suspect. Investigators discovered that he placed a call to Markia several times after she was murdered. He left a voicemail every time asking her why she was avoiding him in an angry tone. When the police interviewed him, he told them that there was a reason for the angry voicemails. He said that they had an argument over the phone on Saturday the 26th. According to him, Markia was upset with him because they weren't spending a lot of time together and he appeared to be acting distant. He says that they were then able to agree to go out on the 29th, the day before Markia's body was discovered. Interestingly, he told the police that he had to cancel their date. He claims that he sent her a text at around 6:30 telling her that he had work to take care of and couldn't hang out that night. Strangely, he wasn't able to provide any details to the police about what he was doing that night instead. When the police asked him about the 30th, the day of her murder, he was able to give them details. He told the police that, at 1:30, he went to a local restaurant. He was even able to tell them exactly what he ordered. He then drove around aimlessly while eating his food. For dinner, he went to another local restaurant and sat at the bar for the rest of the night. He spent most of his time drinking glasses of wine and conversing with the bartender. It turns out that he was telling the truth. Surveillance footage confirmed his alibi. When the police checked the phone records and text logs, they were able to confirm his story there as well. He did send a text to Markia on the 29th at around 7:30 p.m. He was telling her that he was busy and couldn't hang out that night. What the police discovered next would be highly suspicious. After his text to Markia canceling their date, her ex-boyfriend had no activity on his phone until the morning that she was killed. The activity was the voicemails that he had left her. He left her 4 voicemails. One at 1:18 p.m., another at 5:29 p.m., 6:03 p.m., and 10:13 p.m. With each voicemail left, he was getting angrier and angrier. He was saying things like, "Why won't you answer the phone? Why are you doing this?" While those voicemails would suggest he had no idea she was dead at the time, the police believe these calls were staged to remove him from suspicion. Unfortunately, they have nothing concrete to tie him to the murder. The police said that Markia was last seen alive getting into or out of her car the night before her death. She'd sent a text message from her phone to her mother at around 7:45 the same morning that she was found dead. To this day, the murder of Markia Benson remains unsolved. Now, we look at the case of Aesha Muhammed. Those who were attending service at the Liberty Temple Church in New Jersey were beyond shocked when they saw what was at their door. In the early morning of a December day in the year 2000, church officials answered the banging at their doors. When they looked down, they saw 2-year-old Aesha Muhammed looking back at them. The child was alone in the cold. Whoever knocked at the door was gone by the time it was opened. "I'll never forget that day because it was so unusual," Reverend Robert Jiggett said. "When they brought the boy to me, I thought he was a member of the congregation. I held him up near the end of the service and I said, 'Whose child is this?'" Amaru was in tears and very afraid of all of the strangers surrounding him. He was so distraught by the situation that he had wet his pants. His hysterical state made it hard to get any information from him. He was eventually able to tell them his name and not much else. Eventually, they were able to identify the young child and reunite him with his family. His mother, however, wasn't one of the family members who would be there. But why? Amaru would soon tell that story. And it involved the murder of his mother. Aesha Muhammed was a 23-year-old single mother and she lived with her child in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She attended Venus Beauty Academy in the hopes of pursuing a career as a beautician. She worked at a salon when she wasn't in school. Aesha had her 2-year-old son Amaru with 32-year-old Anthony McLean. Aesha lived with her son in a boarding house owned by her uncle, Charles Dawkins. During the week, Amaru would stay with his father. During the weekends, he would stay with his mother. For Aesha though, the weekends weren't enough. That led to her making a big decision. On November 23, 2000, Aesha told Amaru's father that she wanted to spend more time with Amaru. Anthony agreed, resulting in Aesha ecstatically picking her son up on November 27. Under this new arrangement, they were going to be able to stay together until December 8. Sadly, Aesha's excitement would be overridden by the tragedy that would ensue. Just a week later, Aesha and Amaru were gone. On Thursday, November 29, Aesha had a concerning conversation with her sister. She told her that she was adamant about moving out of the boarding house because their uncle Charles was getting on her nerves. Her sister, Gadira, told Aesha that she could move in with her. Aesha called her the next day to work out the details, but Gadira didn't answer the phone. On November 30, Aesha called her brother, Solomon, in a very frantic state. She told Solomon that their uncle Charles threw her dinner in the garbage and had gone crazy. She had her bags packed and asked her brother to come to get her. Solomon didn't have a car, so he asked their other sister Wakita to pick her up. She called Aesha many times throughout that night and didn't get an answer once. They proceeded to have trouble getting in touch with Aesha. This was unlike her. She spoke with her family every day and she would never leave anywhere without letting someone know where she was going. By the time the weekend came, all of her siblings were in a panic. They reached out to their father, David Muhammad, in Atlanta and let him know that they couldn't get in touch with Aesha. Muhammad immediately got a flight to Philadelphia. When he got there, he went straight to the boarding house to search for his daughter. He found that her room had already been cleaned out. When he asked Charles what happened, he was told that Aesha took off with her son and he had no idea where she was. Then, 3 days later, Amaru was found 92 miles from home. On December 3, 2000, a pastor at the Liberty Temple Church in East Orange, New Jersey heard a bang at the door. When he went to see who it was, he found a small child crying on the steps. He was completely alone. He told the pastor that his name was Amaru Muhammad and that his mother was dead. Mommy died. They were fighting. Mommy was bleeding. Mommy got hit by a rock. Aesha's sister Wakita learned that Amaru was found in New Jersey and immediately called the police. Amaru was then returned to his father. Fearing that something horrible happened to Aesha, the spotlight landed on Charles. Charles had a very long criminal history. In fact, he was released from prison just 10 months before Aesha disappeared. He was on parole at the time. He agreed to take a polygraph test but then took off. Charles was on the run for 6 months until he was arrested in New Jersey for violating his parole. He has never been formally charged with any crime connected to Aesha. Aesha remains missing nearly 22 years later and investigators suspect foul play. To this day, we still don't know what happened to Aesha Muhammad.